Jonathan Grant at your service, the Enterprise Account Team Lead. So with that being said, dynamic field triggers is going to be very helpful for specific users, let's say project managers, crew members that are on the field and need to get notifications out faster to the office and do not have to manually maybe text or need to send an email to somebody at the office, right? So a dynamic field trigger would be very helpful when you just need to toggle something on and off or just place a answer based on something that you might be seeing on a project, and that can trigger a specific automation to be sent out to different people, either to the client, to internal team members, or any other kind of like task or notification that has to be sent out. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to show you guys what that looks like and where we would go to set those up. And we can see that example in live demonstration. I'm going to be demonstrating this from within my demo account. So first things first, let me go ahead and clarify. You might have already heard of project-based triggers or project stage-based triggers. Now, what's the difference between a dynamic field trigger and a project stage trigger? So the difference between these both is that whenever a project is jumping between stage and stage, that is when a trigger can start off, and that can start a specific workflow. So for example, if I were to change over Matthew Williams to some other stage where there's a trigger on another stage, that would fire off that specific automation. Okay. So let me go ahead and actually show you guys that example. So let's say Percival Evans. If I switch him over to creating quote, we can head over to workflows. And within a couple of quick seconds there, that would be a workflow that just started by changing the project from one stage to another. What's the difference between a dynamic field trigger? So dynamic field trigger would be if we head over to the project I was looking into, let's say Matthew Williams, and we have our dynamic fields right here. If I would change these specific values to something else, that would be a different trigger that will shoot out information that I already had pre-set up. But before we get there and show you guys that live demonstration, let's talk about how do we set the dynamic fields up. First things first, you'll need to have access to company settings. So I'm just going to head over to company settings right here in my demo. You're going to head over to projects and head over to others. And this is where the match is going to live for our dynamic fields. So we click dynamic fields to drop down there, and we can add as many dynamic fields as we like. And we have different kinds of options that you can use. So if I add a field, I can place the name, and I could also change within the type. So the type could be single line, multi-line, number, drop down checkbox, and date. And if we look at the unit, the identifier is like, what's the identifier that we're using for ProLine to look up this dynamic field when it's being used, okay? However, if I already have one here, I'm going to be using the one that says roof damage. If we use a drop down, we can see it says minor, major, and critical. We're going to get to the exact example why this one is very helpful for. So let me just jump over here. So if you're going to go ahead and start building out a trigger based off a dynamic field, first things first, you do have to head over to hamburger menu, head over to workflows, and I'm just going to be here. And then you're going to see these three tabs here. You're going to have trigger, workflows, and active workflows. You're going to create, first of all, your dynamic trigger. So you're going to go ahead and create a trigger. And this is going to be project stage, the one we previously saw when you're moving a project from a stage to stage. But we're going to select the one that says dynamic field. And we can choose our dynamic field, which we would like to start a workflow based on this, based on the dropdown that we have here, right? I'm not going to create a new one because I already have it here. So I'm just going to show you how it looks. So if I click over the one I already have, we can see it's dynamic field roof damage. And I'm going to say, okay, whenever this dynamic field is being used and it's being modified, the value is being changed to something like major, critical, or minor, I want a specific workflow to start, right? Workflow, and then the automations are within the workflow. So whenever a project, within a project, if I change the dynamic field value for this one specifically to major, it's going to start this workflow. If you might need a refresher on how you can create a workflow, after you create your trigger, which we already saw here how you can create it, just go over to workflows, select your specific folder. If you do not have a folder which you would like to have created, you can just create a new one right above here. And then you can just click on create workflow, right? So you select the name, what kind of workflow type is it? Is it going to be project, event, or job? It would be project if you're using a dynamic trigger. And then you can choose whatever folder you want it to go to. So I'm going to show you guys the dynamic or the workflow that I'm using for this test. So I'm going to click the pencil icon that we see here. And so whenever, and I'm using this from the perspective or the side of whenever a project's already, the job has been scheduled, and let's say the project manager has noticed that there's more damage than what they had previously saw, right? So, or they anticipated or whenever they did the initial inspection. So first things first, I'm saying here, I want a push notification sent to my operations manager. So my higher up would be Thomas Jones. You can select whoever it would be. If it would be somebody that's on the project currently that has a role or other team member, you can also have the title and the body right here. So after that is set, you can also just save it and then head over to the one that we have for email notification. So we have push notification and email. I have both because a push notification can be well missed, but an email notification will always stay on their inbox. Also create a task for the assignee. So let's say for the sales rep, letting him know, hey, we found additional damage on this job. So please go ahead and talk with the customer, right? But we also want an email sent to the customer at that moment to let him know that, hey, this is an update on your project. This is what's going on. So after we already set our workflow and we already have our trigger, which we were at previously, let me just head over there. I'm just going to go ahead and select this one. So we created our workflow. Then you can just pull from the list of workflows that you have from right here. Now let's go ahead and see the magic, right? This is what we're here for. So I'm going to go over to Matthew Williams. Right now, the roof damage says it's set to none. If we saw previously, if it's changed to the major, that's when the trigger is going to fire out, right? So we just go ahead and see there's nothing currently running here. And I'm just going to go ahead and change this. Change that to major. We just saw the update here. And we just need to give it a couple of seconds for this workflow to start. There you go. Okay, good. So it just started based on the modification of the value on that specific dynamic field. And first thing that's going to go out, the push notification just went out. Now it's going to send the email notification to Thomas Jones, who is our operation manager, who is my higher up. And then it's going to create a task for Dylan Dixon afterwards, who is the assignee on the project, so he can contact the customer. And also there's an email that's going to be sent to the customer later on. We're just going to give that a couple more seconds to go out while it does its stuff. So we see that's going, if we go back to the project, there is the last emails that's being sent. Currently spilling the stuff out. So it's saying, hi, Matthew. Updating your project, Matthew Williams. Hi, Matthew, during today's project on your property. And boom, just went out, ended. And we can see the email just went out. So there you guys go. Wanted to show you that. So as a recap, just to give you guys a bit more information, the main difference between a project stage trigger and a dynamic field trigger is that whenever a project is moving from stage to stage, that's when that specific trigger and automation would start. However, if it's a dynamic field trigger, it would change whenever you made a modification to certain values that you have on a dynamic field. Do have to clarify, though, that the dynamic field do not appear upon creating a project. These will show up after the project is created. As an example, if I go to the plus icon project and I look at the fields, dynamic field will not show up here. They will only show up whenever the project is already created and you start modifying your information. As you can see, um, this was just a matter of a click. So it's very helpful for a project manager that's on at the job site. He does not have time to let his boss know of the situation that's going on, not even to send the email to the customer or tell the sales rep that there's an issue or there was something found on the project site. So that's a bit faster. If he was on a ladder and, he just figured that out, he does not want to call or does not have time to call, this would be more reliable and a bit more faster by just opening up the ProLine app, changing the value of the dynamic field, and that trigger just starts off and he gets the information. The customer gets the information and the operation manager as well. So to recap, to finish up everything we saw here today, from company settings, first things first would be go to company settings, go to projects, and then others. And this is where you create your dynamic fields. Add your fields, whatever value you want to see here, except for single line, multi-line. Dynamic fields can be used even without a dynamic trigger, obviously. So a dynamic trigger would be helpful whenever there's certain information you need to be sent out immediately when there's something specific that's changed within a project or an urgency on that project as well. So after you create your dynamic field triggers, just head over to hamburger menu, workflows, and then you start building out your triggers here. And after you build your triggers, nothing would start unless you already have a workflow built out. So you would head over to workflows, create a new workflow. You can select whatever folder you want it to go to. And that's pretty much it. Then you just change the values on your dynamic triggers and they're all set. Appreciate you guys jumping on today's office hours. We're always here each Tuesday and we'll be looking out for you for next week with another topic. Have a good one.